I have this great love of the Scottish Highlands. I'm never far away from up there. And one memorable afternoon of streaming sunshine, I was halfway up Stack Polly, that knob of geological chaos in Assynt, when my mobile phone went off. The line wasn't great, but somewhat out of breath, I grabbed the phone and took the call. And on the other end was my lovely friend Andrea from STV's Scotsport programme, who was on to ask how my summer was going. The phone reception kept coming and going up there in the West Highlands, but I could hear Andrea coming to the red meat of her call. Would I could swear she had just asked me, be willing to play the piano on Scotsport? Say that again, Andrea. I came back a bit bemused. What did you say about a piano? Andrea duly confirmed that the producer of the show, Henry, believed it would be great fun if, with Jim Delahunt announcing the closing credits, I'd be sitting there at a grand piano playing the show out. Elton John was in Glasgow that week, and I think the joke was that if you'd failed to get a ticket for Reg, then I'd be your next best thing. And so it came to pass, and the horrible evidence of it remains out there somewhere on YouTube, that I played the piano on Scotsport, a medley I had put together of a couple of Elton numbers that I could play with my eyes shut. And thus, I played a major role in the shutting down, the deteriorating quality and popularity of the long-running Scotsport programme. Those of you of a certain vintage may remember Scotsport and all it meant in our lives. Sunday afternoons in the 1970s, 2 p.m, and there the music would start, that pounding percussion at the beginning, and soon there would be Arthur Montford, Ian Archer, Bob Crampsey, and others on our screens, ready to feast us, to absolutely indulge us with the weekend's Scottish football action. Before you knew it, Willie Pettigrew would be on our screens, cleaning out each nostril with an almighty snort, while putting Celtic to the sword at Parkhead or blasting goals past Hearts at Fir Park. And then a John Gregg or John Blackley, a Willie Garner, a Dixie Deans, Bobby Graham, Quinton Young, a flying Rab Prentice, Graham Payne, a young Willie Miller, a Joey Harper. Up they all came on Scotsport in this memorable new colour TV. The night before on the Beeb, we'd have had Sports Scene, or originally Sports Reel, with Archie Macpherson being just a tad more lofty, a tad more self-important than Arthur Montford could ever be. Archie, in truth, saw himself as being a bit more cerebral, a bit more broadsheet to Arthur's daily record, a truth I came to appreciate more and more as I got to know both men in my younger years as a reporter. Archie liked to use big words, not always in the right context, while Arthur famously described one goal at Tannadice by exclaiming, "He really biffed it!" A very small detour here. The verb to biff, not a word I was familiar with until I heard the old joke about a Glasgow drunk man with a wifey in some passionate embrace. Quite a bit of sexual effort involved, with the woman imploring, "Keep biffing!" And the drunk guy falls flat on all fours and says, "Nae biff left." Anyway, back to Scotsport. So these were the joys of a Sunday afternoon when, in an age of broadcasting innocence, you would get the highlights of either one or two Scottish games from the day before, no more, before the added gem of an English match, much noisier, much more exciting atmosphere, which STV received courtesy of Granada or London Weekend or HTV or any of the numerous ITV offshoots down south. In terms of football, this was all educational in a way. I didn't realise it at the time, but in the years and years I spent watching not just Scottish football, but on Scotsport, games like Leeds v Stoke, Wolves v Burnley, Spurs v Arsenal, Bristol Rovers v Brighton, Everton v Southampton, on and on it went. What it did was it filled your head with knowledge and memory of sheer football, which actually served me well when writing about football actually became my job. What I thought had been a gloriously misspent youth had actually been, in part, an enjoyable apprenticeship in what I came to do for a living. I had absorbed so much football knowledge, and not just by playing it 7 days a week, but by watching Scotsport. Before I helped to ruin it, Scotsport was also a very prestigious and well-known brand in British broadcasting. Indeed, by the time it was put down in 2008, not long after my piano appearance, it was officially the longest-running sports programme on British television, beating Grandstand onto the air by about 2 months back in 1957. And warm, welcoming Arthur remained the host and presenter for goodness knows, maybe 30 years, with his famous check jackets frequently causing the screen to go either fuzzy or even psychedelic. What fun it all was. "Watch your legs, Dennis! Watch your legs!" Arthur famously implored of Dennis Law as the ageing Man United hitman, the mongoose, chased after Czechoslovakia in that famous 1973 World Cup qualifier at Hampden. You'd never get Archie shouting anything like that. But Scotsport was great fun. It was exciting. It filled a young Scottish football fan with wonder. This thing we had in our lives, Scottish football, all these clubs, all these colours, it was fantastic. Like a religious faith, it took a hold of your life. It helped you bounce along through one day to the next. I faithfully kept watching Scotsport and Sportscene, never in my wildest dreams imagining that one day I would appear on both as some sort of jumped up idiot football pundit. But one problem was Scotsport began to lose its innocence. As the 1980s and 1990s came along, young guys in sharp suits arrived who didn't drink Tennent's Lager, and they had new ideas about TV, about football presentation, and how to do it better. And I've got no doubt that their ideas were correct. There was a better way to cover football on the telly. And by this time, on Scotsport, Arthur was getting older and nearer retirement, and STV went for these smooth younger dudes. First Jim White, then Jim Delahunt and others to present the show. And these guys were good. They might even have been better than Arthur. But here was the truth of it. Something of the old magic of Scotsport had gone. By this point, I was on my way in sports journalism, freelancing for the Sunday Times. Goodness me, a bag of nerves, filing an old firm match report from Celtic Park at the age of 23, and then into my stride at Scotland on Sunday, where wiser, older journalists tried to show me the ropes, and I duly ignored just about all of them. What a pest. What an arrogant tit I was. But I did make my way, and I could write, and then one day I came upon the dreaded message written on a yellow sticker taped to my screen. "Hi, Graham," it read. "Please call Jerry McNee at STV. Oh no, I thought. I knew exactly what this was. So Scotsport back in the early 1990s had introduced a new slot to the show, a phone-in for a studio panel, which consisted of either 2 or 3 newspaper hacks. I began to dread this. What if they call me? What if they ask me to do this? I'm not sure I could handle it. Sure enough, the bold Jerry dragged me on, and I made a very faltering start. But it was the beginning of my stint in what would become the downfall of Scotsport. Jerry was a brilliant guy, bright, funny, withering, contemptuous, and it was always fun to be around him. And so each Sunday, I would go and sit alongside guys like Gordon McQueen and Alan McInally, both of whom would look at me thinking, who the hell's this kid? And extemporise on football. That's right, I would extemporise, as the old preachers used to say. You speak off the cuff. You see the film of football and you just open your mouth and try to say something that roughly approximates with something on the screen. I wasn't very good at this, but God knows why they kept having me back on. And then Scotsport began to evolve. Jerry gradually left. He had tons going on. And Jim Delahunt stayed. And then, you may remember this, Julian Sinclair and Sarah O came on the scene, plus a live studio audience. And it all became a bit chaotic and not very good. I think they called it Zoo TV. I'm not sure. They were maybe imitating other shows, but the format didn't work and it got roundly panned. Julian was this smooth TV presenter who I thought was pretty good, but Sarah was something different. A lovely Irish girl with a lullaby accent who you couldn't help thinking, knew next to nothing about Scottish football, you couldn't escape the feeling that watching Sarah present Scotsport would be a bit like watching me presenting Tomorrow's World. It just wasn't convincing. But I will say, looking back, I think Sarah O came up against the sort of abuse, maybe a degree of misogyny that just wouldn't be allowed today. There was this extraordinary taking down of her on the Hogmanay hit show, Only an Excuse, in which Jonathan Watson, a really gifted actor, portrayed Sarah as this Irish slag with big tits, rough end of the trench, almost a hint of sex worker about her. A really cruel, unflattering parody. I don't think that sketch would be allowed today. I vividly remember watching it, wincing and laughing at the same time. And I mean laughing out loud, something I now feel quite ashamed of looking back. And so then, with the final nail in the coffin ready, here I come myself. I'm up in Assynt, like I said earlier, and the Scotsport office come on the phone suggesting that I tinkle the ivories on the show. Nobody believes now when I say this, and they didn't believe me at the time, but I dreaded doing it. I just didn't think it would work. But what we did was we pre-recorded the segment down at Glasgow's Theatre Royal, I seem to recall, and it was inserted to the tail end of that week's Scotsport as if live, and the deed was done. I think I stayed indoors for the next 5 days. It wasn't long after this that STV announced that Scotsport was to be killed off. By this point, I had many enemies in the Scottish press, and they were all perfectly justified. And I picked up the Daily Record one morning to see the story of Scotsport's end, in which they used a picture of me, not Arthur, not Jim Delahunt, a picture of me with the joyful caption, Spiers, ... axed. I remember my friend Alan Campbell brandishing this in front of me at that weekend's Scottish Cup final at Hampden and saying, "Oh, this is marvellous to see. What a great story to read." With friends like these, eh? So I need to say here, I'm sorry, Scotsport, I did you in. The very programme I loved, a programme I had adored since childhood, I ended up hastening to its grave. But none of this can take away the memories of, in its day, a brilliant football show. Scotsport and Arthur Montford in my 1970s youth were absolutely emblematic of Scotland at the time. The shipyards and the coal mines were still going at it, and industrial men still sweated at their tasks. And there, on a Sunday, was smooth, dapper Arthur, cooling everyone down to give us our 1 hour of comfort and joy on the day of rest. It was magical television. My kids today know nothing of the cultural gem that was Scotsport. They've got every gizmo under the sun, every game, every Xbox, every TikTok, every yapping Snapchat you could find. They know nothing of the jewels of the story of television. They've got everything, these kids, and yet they're totally impoverished.